in this new program of the series Outlooks on Public Participation. Its hosts, Marta Lora Tamayo, Professor of Administrative Law, and Antonio Lopez, Professor of Social Work and Social Services, both at UNED, will be talking about Ecuador to tackle the main traits of public participation in this country, the role of the stakeholders involved, and strategies to enhance public participation with regards to the challenges that arise due to climate change. The topic will be explored through the interview of Mayra Herrera Jaramillo, an architect specialized in planning, management, and urban funding. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you are listening to us. We are back for a new show of the series Outlooks on Public Participation of the Participatory Group, the agreement between UNED and the City Council of Madrid. Today with me is, as usual, Antonio Lopez Peláez, co-director of the Participatory Group, together with me from UNED as well. Hello, Antonio. How are you doing? I'm very happy. I love the radio. Thank you very much. Today with us is a very special guest, as I said, from the other side of the ocean, Mayra Herrera Jaramillo. How are you doing? Good morning in Ecuador, good afternoon in Spain. I am very happy to share this space with you and to tell you a little bit about what's happening in Ecuador. Thank you so very much, Mayra. You are an architect, you've got a master's degree in territorial and urban development, you are currently in the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. You will be telling us about the experience of Ecuador normally in the participatory group, and that's why this is such a special episode. We have local level case studies, not that many at national and international level. But today, Mayra will be talking to us about the importance of what Ecuador is undergoing, a country living a very tense political situation at the moment, and yet you are carrying out national communications at national level with regards to climate change to take to the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Please tell us about how it's being co-created through public participation. I'm an architect, as Marta was saying, and I'm an expert in urban development. And in this national communication, I'm specialized in human settlements, one of the main sectors within this country. They're very vulnerable, and we hope to mobilize them in climate action. My role as part of the communication is notably to draft and to carry out accountability activities with regards to this sector. Now, I'd like to say that Ecuador in the past few years has been working thoroughly on managing climate change effects and reporting. National communications is one of the key actions as part of this effort. Firstly, because it's part of our international commitment, but secondly, because this is an exercise that allows us to analyze and identify the vulnerabilities and capacities of our country when tackling climate change. This is my first national communication, by the way. It became very clear to me just how vulnerable Ecuador is, one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. Its cities and communities are some of the most vulnerable, especially my sector. This communication will allow us to access technical support in certain areas as well as funding. Communications will allow us to identify the areas that require more resources. Another fundamental area is, when carrying out this national communication, the promotion of transparency, participation of the stakeholders deemed relevant, and for them to join forces to hold other actors accountable at local, regional, and national level, also with regards to civil society organizations. It's worth noting that public participation is a right recognized in the Ecuadorian Republic Constitution. We not only try to guarantee this constitutional right, but to promote it, and this communication should be a clear reflection of all the actions taking place in the country. How fascinating, Mayra. Today we will also be carrying out an interview about the key of localization. We've got legal powers, constitutional powers, and yet we need to implement specific mechanisms and to identify those stakeholders not only those that are most likely to participate, but those that feel most alienated, isolated, and for which participation is crucial. What mechanisms and processes have been introduced to make it possible for populations and citizens and governments to participate? How have you identified relevant stakeholders? I imagine this is a very complex process. It is indeed, and a huge challenge for us. Our national communication started just this year, so we will have to go through different stages of participation. We are in such a hurry. It's important to highlight the role of the team in charge of communications. Many experts have already worked together with civil society and local and governmental institutions, so we have a lot of experience and knowledge as a team. And we've been able to define mechanisms to enhance citizen participation. In fact, I worked for almost 7 years in the ministry in charge of urban development in Ecuador, so I know a lot about how these groups and especially municipalities, how they work. So it's much more than approaching municipalities in a formal way institutionally, but more about knocking on our friends' doors to promote participation from that space of trust. Building a relationship of trust will help us explain to them why their contribution is necessary and why we need municipalities to start reporting. It's also worth noting that for this national communication, a month ago, we held a participatory national workshop with all stakeholders working on climate change adaptation. The project has financial resources allocated, so we were able to bring many experts here and encourage municipal participation, especially when it comes to the most vulnerable municipalities to climate change, or when citizen participation doesn't have the resources it needs to travel to the capital city, for instance. We need then to consider all of these data so that we can bring people, help them travel. Our goal is to raise funds from or in larger cities like Quitos to help smaller municipalities like La Esmeralda receiving funds. These are some of the mechanisms that we have implemented. How interesting and insightful. Now, this first report is about transparency and the fifth communication effort. For those not in Ecuador listening to us on the radio, what would you say, Mayra, are the most important outcomes or aspects that you'd like to share with our audience so that they understand what these efforts of transparency and accountability are all about? What are you bringing to the table in terms of solutions? Well, one of the most important chapters for me is that of adaptation of the country. I would not only like to tell our citizens what we are doing, but instead the rest of the world not only share the vulnerabilities of Ecuador specifically in human settlements, but all the efforts carried out by the main ministries, the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of Housing and Transportation, Urban Development, and local activities undertaken by, for instance, technical assistance. We see many improvements, and yet I'd say that the main weakness we have is that these efforts are not sustainable in time. This is a good opportunity for us to share with the world what we are doing through these reports. That's how civil society organizations might hear about all the advancements that are taking place in public policy in Ecuador. Thank you so much, Mayra, for your capacity to summarize information. I'd say that you have highlighted throughout your remarks, you've highlighted 2-3 key elements of participation. The first one of which is, of course, cross-sectionality. It's not only about one ministry, one department of government, one sector. we need the participation of all stakeholders. And I'd also enjoyed that reference to knocking on your friends' doors. It's important that you build trust. Your friends are networks of collaborative trust. That's what participation is all about, generating trust, building trust in our institutions. You can call it friendship or otherwise, or maybe relationships of governance, as people say mildly today. But I loved how you expressed it, because it's what we all do, and we don't say it institutionally. But I use my contacts like everyone else because they trust me, and this is fundamental in participation. Last but not least, it's important to disseminate outcomes of participation activities that are so useful for self-assessment, self-diagnosis. We are facing climate change in a position of vulnerability, and yet we want to find solutions to move forward. That is a very important prior step. It's an activity where, regardless of the outcomes reached, if any, the self-diagnosis part is key. Secondly, the drafting of a plan of action, the national communication strategy, will serve as a sort of conclusion. Thank you so much for waking up early to join us to record this program. Here it's midday, but it's very early in Ecuador. We would like to keep inviting you. Please keep us informed in the upcoming months of the process, and it's important to make that political will effort to guarantee continuity. Exactly, and it's my pleasure to be part of this space. I studied my 4th grade in Spain. I find myself in a constant dialogue between Spain and Ecuador because I consider Spanish academia like my university. So please keep calling me, count on me if you need any feedback, any update. I'd love to keep sharing my wide experience working on the drafting of public policies from the central government of Ecuador. Again, thank you. I'm at your disposal if you need me to tell you about the progress of this national communication before we send this to the UNFCCC. Before that, we need to validate it through the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. Again, I'm at your disposal for whatever you need me to do. Thank you so much. We will call you for a future radio episode about the final results of this project. Thank you. Good morning. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you, Mayra.